Why did some object to Jesus being anointed in Bethany? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Mark on Walking Through the Bible.
His word, the glory of His cross.
As this is our first episode of 2020, we'd like to wish all of our viewers a happy new year and pray that you will either begin or continue serving the Lord this year. If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Mark chapter 14. We're going to be reading from verses 1 to 9. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Mark chapter 14, beginning at verse 1. After 2 days it was the Passover and the feast of unleavened bread. And the chief priests and the scribes sought how they might take him by trickery and put him to death. But they said, "Not during the feast, lest there be an uproar of the people." And being in Bethany, at the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at the table, a woman came, having an alabaster flask of very costly oil of spikenard. Then she broke the flask and poured it on his head. But there were some who were indignant among themselves and said, "Why was this fragrant oil wasted? For it might have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor." And they criticized her sharply. But Jesus said, "Let her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has done a good work for me. For you have the poor with you always, and whenever you wish, you may do them good. But me you do not have always. She has done what she could. She has come beforehand to anoint my body for burial. Assuredly, I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be told as a memorial to her." After having finished discussing about the destruction of the Jerusalem temple in the last chapter, we now come to chapter 14. The rest of this book, with the exception of the last 7 verses in chapter 16, take place in a period of 4 to 5 days, depending on how you want to reckon the events of verses 1 and 2. Now, it is important to note that the Jews calculate the time differently to the Romans, and different than we do today. The Romans and us calculate time from midnight to midnight, while the Jews calculate time from sunset to sunset, something we'll need to remember in order to avoid getting confused. Therefore, in dealing with the days for the rest of the book, we're going to refer to Jewish time first and then translate that into our time. So after 2 days from the events of chapter 13 was the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Recall from our study of Exodus that this would make sense, for the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread commemorated events that occurred back to back, which was the passing over of the firstborn son in Egypt and the haste of the Exodus. So if this is after 2 days from the events of chapter 13, what day are we talking about? This would be the 5th day of the week, what we would call Thursday, since the Passover would be eaten at the end of the 6th day of the week that year. Thus, this would have been the day that the Jews began removing leaven from their houses. In our study of Matthew, we said that the chief priests likely met during the 4th day of the week to plan the death of Jesus, but Mark opens the door that this might have occurred instead on the 5th day of the week. Whichever is true is immaterial, as the event did happen. They knew that they wanted to take him by trickery and put him to death, but said that they would not do so during the feast, meaning when the Passover would be eaten, lest the crowds prevent them from doing so. Their goal would be to have him be dead before any of the public knew it. Little did they know that one of Jesus' own disciples would soon come to them and assist them in their plan. Coming now to verse 3, Mark, like Matthew, makes it seem as this event is chronological with what we've been talking about, but John's account would conclusively show that it is not. This event occurred on the Saturday before, while Jesus was in Bethany, the day before Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem. The event took place at the house of Simon the leper. According to Leviticus, lepers were unclean and were to reside outside the village until they were pronounced clean by the priest. So why did Jesus eat in the house of a leper? And why was this leper seemingly present? The necessary conclusion is that Simon, though he had been a leper, was no longer a leper, either because Jesus had healed him or the leprosy had been cured on its own and he pronounced clean. He was likely still referred to by Mark as a leper, so not as to confuse him with another Simon, like Simon Peter, for instance. While at Simon's house, an unidentified woman comes to Jesus who had an alabaster flask, a white stone flask, which contained expensive fragrant oil. What she did with the oil was pour it over Jesus' head as he sat at the table. The disciples, when they saw this, were upset, saying that the oil was wasted, for it could have been sold for over 300 denarii and given to the poor. This would be about 125 Canadian dollars or 95 US dollars in 2020 money. When Jesus heard them speaking this, though, he put an end to it right there by asking them, why were they troubling this woman? For she had done a good work. The reason this was a good work is because this oil was preparing Jesus' body for burial. The poor are present in society always, but he was not always going to be with them. Was Jesus despising the poor here? No, for in chapter 10, he told the rich young ruler to sell all that he had and give to the poor. Jesus, though, is saying that sometimes we need to prioritize what we do. There will always be opportunities to help the poor, and we should try to find those opportunities. For no matter what social programs our government can come up with, there will always be those who are poor. However, sometimes the situation comes up where we should rather spend our resources on something else that is needed to be done. Jesus was about to die, and so this oil was being put to good use. So valuable was this act to Jesus that he said wherever the gospel would be preached, what this woman had done would also be told as a memorial to her. And that's exactly what we have here, for it is recorded in the Bible in 2 other places, showing us that what this woman did for Jesus was important, for it showed her love and concern for him in his time of need. With that, our time is up today. Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Mark chapter 14, verses 10 to 21, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.